You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Before we can explain this commandment, it's important that we understand the Jewish belief about names. Because God reveals, if you remember, God reveals his name to Moses. He reveals his name as Yahweh, which means I am who am. Referring to God as the source of being. I am who am. Now, the thing about names for the Jewish people is that to give a person your name reveals a certain level of trust and intimacy. So for a Jewish person, you wouldn't just give your name out to anybody. Okay? You wouldn't give your name out to your enemies. You wouldn't give your name out to strangers. You only give your name to people who you want to be in a relationship with. Because the person of the Jew and the name of the person are seen to be intimately connected. Okay? A name's just not some sort of tag that we put on a person in the Jewish view. Well, for God, this is the same. I mean, God reveals his name to the Jewish people precisely because they have this understanding. Okay? God doesn't just give his name out to anyone. He gives his name out to the Jewish people who he is in a relationship with. Okay? It's an act of trust and intimacy. He reveals himself to the Israelites by giving them his name. So that means that to abuse God's name is to do what? To abuse God. That's right, because the name and the person are connected. It's not as if they're separated. Well, they are separated, you know what I mean, but they're intimately connected. So that's why we have this commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God, in vain. So, as the Catechism says, we must only use God's name, and that even means for us the word God in English. We should only use God's name to praise, bless, and glorify him. To praise, bless, and glorify him. Any other use of God's name is a sin, is sinful. So even casual uses of God's name, the oh my God and all that, is a sin. Certainly swearing with God's name, is a sin. Even farther, it's possible to use God's name in a way that's blasphemous. Mixing God's name in with other swear words, for example, blasphemy. That is a severe abuse of God.
Can I ask your opinion on one thing?
Sure.
I've had people tell me that they believe saying, oh my gosh, is really you're just substituting it. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I've heard that argument mostly from Protestants.
Okay.
Actually.
Because I do that instead of the other.
And, I mean, there's no there's no official church opinion on that. My own opinion is that that is okay as an expression because it is an intentional way to avoid using God's name.
Right, or Jesus, I've heard many times from people that phrase.
Right. So I think because it's an intentional avoiding of using God's name,
That makes sense.
that it's not at all.
Gotcha.
Now, also under this commandment comes things that that we should hold in reverence that if we use in speech carelessly. So, for example, any sort of irreverent talk about sexual activity falls under this commandment, because sexual activity is a blessed activity of a husband and wife that God has created for the union of husband and wife. and the bringing forth of new children. And so to use anything regarding that in speech carelessly is really a carelessness about God, because God has created that. See what I'm saying? Or anything to do with, obviously something about the human person themselves, but anything that should be held in reverence that we speak about irreverently comes under this commandment. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so that can include a lot of different things. It can include the church, include the saints, include, throughout sexual activity, because most people don't think of that one. but that's not something that we should be talking about flippantly, you see, because it's part of God's revered creation. Okay. Also coming under this commandment is false oaths and perjury. So perjury is lying under oath. Now, probably none of us here have had the opportunity to perjure ourselves, but we could sometime have the opportunity, that we are put under oath sometime in a very serious matter, and we need to make sure that we tell the truth. The reason that it's under this commandment and not under the lying one, well, it is under the lying one too, because we're lying, but it's more under this commandment because when we take an oath, what are we saying? We are saying, I swear by God's name that what I am saying is true. And so it's a serious sin to lie, because then we make, a fool out of God's name. You see?
But it's okay to do that though in the state, like in court, it's okay.
Yes, it's okay to
On God's name,
yes.
swear by him.
Yes, because that's not a false oath, that's a true oath.
Okay.
So you're taking a true oath. But if you lie while under the true oath, you've committed perjury. You've lied on God's name.
That was going to be my question, but then it also made me think of, I always thought it was bad to say, people have the habit of saying, I swear if you do that
Yes.
again.
That's
They
a
don't
false
say
oath.
anything. Okay,
It's a false oath.
okay.
Yeah, so that's a sin. And depending on what they say, I suppose, would determine the gravity of the sin.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about that more later once we get into confession, about the gravity of these sins. Because some of them are light sins and some of them are more serious sins that break our relationship with God. I'll give you, don't worry, I'll spell it in excruciating detail. Which sins go under which category. Okay. For example, well, I don't want to get into that yet. Just hang on for that. Any other questions? This one. Yes, sister.
Now, is that, I don't know if it's this commandment, saying other bad words, like?
Yeah, again, it depends on what it is. Not all, I think that not all vulgar language is necessarily sinful, but some of it is. A good chunk of it is. Yeah, so it depends on what it is. Some of it's just tasteless. It's not sinful, it's just tasteless. But there's also an argument that could be made, I think, that even using vulgar language is degrading of oneself by using that language. So to that extent, I think an argument that might be able to be made that there is sin there. But it depends on, again, it depends on what is said. Yeah. And certainly most of that stuff would be venial sin. Unless you start getting into blasphemy. Then you're talking about mortal sin. Other questions?
What does blasphemy really mean?
Blasphemy
I should
means
know, I don't remember.
it's let's see how to explain it. It's like it's another level of irreverence. So such a severe irreverence that it's almost a direct spitting in the face of God, if you will. It's insulting God. It's blasphemy. So there are certain things just in speech that we could do this blasphemous. And I'm not even, I won't even go into examples because it shouldn't even be on our lips, but we know it when we hear it or see it. You know, one thing that's really amazing, and it proclaims the truth of the truth, is that one thing that you'll see among those who don't believe in God, or those who are so deeply involved in sin that they don't want out and don't want to have anything to do with God, the one object of their blasphemy most of the time is not God, but the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is really interesting because it's sort of a backdoor way of showing the truth of who she is. You see, otherwise, why would they care? You know, bring up the Blessed Mother. They don't like anything of God. See, that it's demonic. You see, it's the sin and all that is all connected, you know, with the evil one. And see what I'm saying? So it's just really interesting that a lot of the blasphemy that happens in the world is directed against her, and that comes from Satan.